Good afternoon, everyone. This is Dan McDonald, and I'd like to welcome everyone to Craig Safety's webinar on post-accident testing. We're excited that you decided to join us today to learn more about this important topic. As I mentioned earlier, my name is Dan McDonald. I'm the VP of Business Development here at Craig Safety Technologies, and I'll be guiding us through the webinar today. If you're not familiar with Craig Safety, we are a safety and technology company that provides an easy-to-use software solution for companies in the transportation industry. Our cloud-based system is called Compliance Safety Manager and helps employers like you simplify employee hiring, managing driver qualification files, employee drug testing, as well as driver's license monitoring. CSM also helps employers manage their vehicle assets to ensure they meet all the regulatory requirements related to your fleet. Before we get started, I have a couple of housekeeping items to mention. You'll note there are some icons running along the top of your screen. If you have questions during the presentation, you may click on the icon that has the two chat bubbles and says Q&A. We'll respond to those questions at the end of the presentation. If we happen to run out of time, we will respond to all the questions in writing and distribute them to everyone who is on the webinar today. We've also prepared some additional documents that are available to you. This includes a copy of this presentation, plus some other documents we'll be referencing in the presentation. To access those, use the chat icon, and there are links in there to the documents. All right, now we got the housekeeping out of the way. Let's go ahead and dig into post-accident testing. So to set the stage, our goal during this webinar is to provide you a greater understanding of the FMCSA regulations related specifically to post-accident testing and what is required of the employer as well as the driver should that situation arise. We're going to show you what elements you should include in your plan in the event of the post-accident event. And what you'll find is we're going to say, make sure you have a plan about 100 times in this presentation because it's just that important. So let's start by defining when an FMCSA post-accident drug and alcohol tests are required. So there are two main elements to consider. One, the type of accident, and two, was there a citation issued to the driver? We've got a chart here to help you. We can see on the chart in the first column that defines the type of accident, and the second column indicates if the driver was issued a citation. The third column tells us if you need to initiate FMCSA testing. So in the case of a human fatality, testing is required whether the driver was issued a citation or not. So human fatality, you always must test. Moving down to the next type, if there's an injury with immediate medical treatment away from the accident scene and the driver was cited, then you must test. If the driver is not cited, testing is not required. Finally, if any vehicle requires a tow away and the driver is cited, again, testing is required. If not, if no citation issued, then no testing required. So that is pretty clear cut to understand, I think. But one thing to also consider is what your internal policies are on post-accident testing. So for the scenarios above where the FMCSA test is not required, as the employer, you may test under your company policy if you have that addressed in your policy. And of course, that testing should be done under non-DOT chain of custody. These other ones you would always want to conduct on your FMCSA chain of custody forms. Moving on, let's talk about one of the main components to consider in post-accident testing. How much time do you have to complete the required testing? So per the regulations, your goal should be to complete the alcohol test in 2 hours and have the drug screen collection completed within 32 hours. So maybe you're wondering why there's such different thresholds for alcohol and drugs. It's really a simple answer. Alcohol and drugs exit the body at very different rates. For alcohol, a general rule of thumb is that one beer, one shot, one glass of wine will exit the body per hour. There are factors that can adjust that, such as the individual's metabolism, weight, age, health, and things like that. So for the drugs included in the DOT drug screen panel, they have a pretty wide range of exit rates, and they can range anywhere from 1 day to a couple of weeks. And with marijuana, because of the way it's stored in the fat cells, for heavy users, chronic users, that can even extend into a few months. Generally, things that are going to affect that exit rate are going to be frequency and amount of use, as I mentioned, body fat percentage, metabolism, hydration, age, and overall health. So we can see on the slide there, alcohol testing, ideally the test should be completed within 2 hours of the accident. That isn't much time, which is why having a plan in place is so important. The regulations go on to say that if the test is not completed within 2 hours, employers need to document why it wasn't completed within that time frame, and then they must continue to attempt to complete the test for another 8 hours or another 6 hours to a full 8 hours. Once they reach that 8-hour threshold, employers can discontinue attempts to test. Why is it that way? Well, after 8 hours, you're not going to get an accurate alcohol test that's really going to show what the driver's BAC, which is your blood alcohol content, if there's any, was at the time of the accident. So if the employer fails to complete that test again in the first 2 hours, we recommend that you update that status every 2 hours until that 8-hour threshold is reached. For drug screening, you've got a lot more time to complete the testing because those drugs stay in the body longer. Employers have 32 hours from the time of the accident to complete the specimen collection for the drug screen. Again, if the testing is not completed within that time frame, you must have a detailed documentation why that test was not completed. It's also worth noting that alcohol tests should be breath alcohol, and drug screens are going to need to be their FMCSA urine tests. For alcohol, the general rules say that you can do a saliva test as the initial screen, but if that initial saliva test is positive, then you've got to confirm it with a breathalyzer test within 20 minutes. And because of these time considerations, really best practice is try to do both your screen and the confirmation test via a breath alcohol test. The last thing you want is to have a positive oral fluid test and not a positive breath alcohol test, confirmation test to back it up. As I mentioned, drug screens must be urine-based. So testing methodologies such as oral fluid or hair testing are not authorized for DOT testing. Now, some of you may be thinking that you thought DOT did authorize oral fluid drug testing, and they did a couple years ago, actually. But there's some other things that need to happen before employers can use that methodology. Specifically, what the industry is waiting on is for DHHS, which is the Department of Health and Human Services. They have to certify laboratories to do the FMCSA oral fluid testing. And there must be at least 2 certified labs. And they make it this way because in the event of a positive test, the donor always has the option to request a retest of that same specimen in a different laboratory. So they need 2. At this time, I don't think there are any labs that have been certified. And one more thing to chime in, just remember all of this testing needs to be done under DOT chain of custody. A few more compliance details that are outlined in the post-accident regulations we want to touch on. So drivers must make themselves available for post-accident testing. So if they leave the scene of an accident, that may be considered a refusal to test. And a refusal to test can carry the same ramifications as a positive test. However, there are medical exceptions. If the driver leaves the scene for emergency medical care or is assisting with the accident, there is no penalty for that. Again, that is why documenting the situation is of supreme importance. Finally, you as the employer must make sure your drivers understand what their responsibilities are in the event of an accident and what the procedures you want them to follow. So there's a number of ways that this can be addressed. Of course, you can do it through the required employee training on drug and alcohol use. Also, putting written instructions in the driver's cab is a good way to help ensure procedures are followed properly every time. So, they get in the accident, they've got the protocol sheet right in there that tells them what they need to do. Employers should also have that information readily available that they can send it to the driver, either by email or by text on their phone. Text or emails to their phone are a good way to disseminate that information quickly to them. So let's touch on law enforcement and how that impacts FMCSA drug testing on your requirements. So, you can pretty much expect that accidents that involve commercial motor vehicles will almost always include the presence of law enforcement. And remember, law enforcement, they have their own set of responsibilities when dealing with an accident situation. And those activities don't necessarily go in line with the employer's priorities. Law enforcement will first be focusing on documenting the circumstances of the accident, issuing tickets, making arrests, coordinating injury care, clearing the roadway, and other similar activities as warranted. And again, your needs may not always be in exact alignment with law enforcement's. If the driver is issued a citation, make sure you get a copy of that. It will contain at least the officer's name and what jurisdiction they represent. Typically, you're not going to see the officer's phone number on there, but if you know the jurisdiction and the officer's name, you can do an internet search off your phone or your PC and find that jurisdiction, maybe get a general number and figure out a way to get in touch with that officer directly. If the circumstances allow, having the driver collect that number can make things easier. That's something you might want to consider putting on that driver protocol. So the FMCSA does have some provisions that allow the use of a police-provided drug or alcohol test result under certain conditions. And I might say this more than once, this should not be your go-to way to get a drug screen and alcohol test done. So what the reg says specifically, the results of a breath or blood test for the use of alcohol or controlled substances for drug use conducted by federal, state, or local law enforcement or public safety officials having independent authority for the test shall be considered to meet the requirements of this section, provided such tests conform to the applicable federal, state, or local alcohol testing requirements, and that the results of the test are obtained by the employer. So that's a lot of word salad there. But what it's basically saying is that the test is acceptable, provided that the official that's performing the test did it in such a way that it meets their local standard. So think about if it's, I live in Hanover County, so if Hanover County is on the scene of the accident and their rules say you got to do X, Y, and Z to complete the test, and they do X, Y, and Z, then you should be able to use that test. If for some reason they don't follow their own procedures, that test may be unusable. Sorry, hit the slide button too fast there. So using an alcohol test conducted by law enforcement is a good fallback solution considering the time sensitivity of the test. 2 hours isn't a lot of time. In a major accident, 8 hours may not be much time. But the good thing is generally law enforcement, when they conduct an alcohol test, they also do a breath alcohol test, which is the same test required by FMCSA. Drug screening is a little murkier, as there are a variety of testing methods available that do not meet FMCSA standards. Methodologies such as rapid testing without a lab-based confirmation, oral fluid testing, hair follicle testing are not authorized by FMCSA. Finally, law enforcement testing may not include the same drugs that you see on an FMCSA test, nor does it typically incorporate a medical review officer. So because there's more time allowed to complete the drug screen, you should really avoid using law enforcement for drug testing, and really only as a very, very last resort. The other part of the regulation says results must be obtainable by the employer. So keep in mind, there is no regulatory statement that says law enforcement must provide you a copy of the results. So you don't want to use law enforcement testing as your first option to test your employees. However, all that being said, definitely coordinating with law enforcement immediately after the accident is the best option to achieve the outcomes that you desire. So there are a few exceptions where testing is not required, and these are pretty self-explanatory. Getting in or out of a stationary motor vehicle, no test required. Loading or unloading cargo, no test required. Operating a passenger car or multi-purpose passenger vehicle, unless the driver is transporting passengers for hire, or that vehicle is also carrying hazardous materials that require placarding. So also, just to touch on, in these types of scenarios, if your policy allows, you can test those individuals under your company policy. Again, if your company policy includes that. And one more time, don't use your federal chain of custody forms for doing that testing. All right, so we're going to start about executing the test. So I've already said this a few times, but having a written plan is essential. It will make sure you are conducting the testing in accordance with the regulations, and it will help you conduct that process as efficiently as possible, which is very important considering the time sensitivity of completing the tests. So step one, let's make sure that everybody understands their roles and responsibilities. The driver must know to notify you immediately of the accident, because the clock is ticking as soon as the accident occurs. The driver must also know everything that is required of them and know that failure to follow the rules may impact them negatively. Employers, you need to know the rules and be ready to take immediate action and follow your established procedures. Managing these scenarios in a consistent manner will only benefit you. The more you do them in the same procedure, the more familiar you are with it, and it just becomes easier and easier to do. So when you're developing your plan, there are some considerations you need to think about. So first, think about the timing of the accident. Drivers on the road 24/7, 365 days a year, which means accidents can occur at any time. So there needs to be a company representative available to represent the employer and coordinate the testing whenever it happens. You should already have a plan in place of who covers things during regular business hours, after business hours, weekends, holidays, etc. And each supervisor that's charged with managing an accident should know the regulations and be prepared to handle the situation. So again, having a written plan is essential. So in formulating your plan, also consider where the accident occurs. So if it's local to your office, you may have a clinic you work with already to coordinate testing. If so, you should have the clinics, their phone numbers, their after-hour phone numbers, and who the contacts are available, so it's easy to contact them. You don't have to go looking for it. It's often a good idea to call ahead to the clinic and confirm that they have a breath alcohol technician on duty that can provide that breath alcohol test. Typically in clinics, there may be just a few personnel that have that training. The equipment's expensive, the training is expensive. So you want to make sure you've got the right person with you to be able to do the correct test. What if the testing is out of town and maybe in a remote area? that brings a whole new set of challenges. Who's going to conduct the testing? If it's an on-site event, which is not uncommon in these situations, how long will it take the collector to get there? This will be among the most challenging scenarios you'll face. Here at Craig Safety, we provide a toll-free number for supervisors to call to get assistance in out-of-town testing coordination needs. You as an employer, a supervisor without a plan, will spend a frustrating amount of time trying to find a clinic that is open that can provide the correct testing in the time frame that you need. If there are injuries involved, the employee may be transported to the hospital. So again, if it's local, you should have in your plan numbers and locations of the local hospitals in your area. Also, maybe you can get contact information, whether it's going to be in the laboratory or the ER, wherever it's going to happen. If the driver is transported to a hospital and they are out of town, you need to find out what hospital and where it is. If the driver is in such a condition that they can't communicate that information with you, really the best option is to get with law enforcement, and they can probably tell you where they were taken. One other thing to touch on, I'm sure most all of you are using ELDs in your vehicles. If your ELD is equipped to recognize when an accident happens, and they're able to notify the employer of such occurrence, make sure that those notifications are going to the right people. When you get that, you can almost start investigating the situation before the driver may be even able to contact you. So we've put together the framework for a sample response plan. And I'll just mention again, this presentation deck is available. You can download it from the chat. There's a link for it in there. We've divided our plan up into 5 phases, and we break it out by blocks of time. There will be variances from company to company based on the size of company, the size of your fleet, and what kind of work you do. But phase 1 really occurs in the first hour after an accident. So on the driver's side, they need to ensure their own safety and call emergency services, secure the scene. So they put out their triangle alerts or road flares. If they can move their vehicle off to the side of the road, those types of activities. They need to notify dispatch or the supervisor immediately. They need to remain at the scene unless medically required to leave. And again, they need to avoid alcohol or controlled substances. Now let's touch on that last bullet there. Avoiding alcohol or controlled substances directly after an accident seems crazy that you'd have to tell the driver this. But if you have a driver that may have been drinking before the accident while they're driving down the road, they may think that if they start drinking after the accident, there would be no way for the employer to really determine the BAC or the blood alcohol content before the accident. Fortunately, we have other paths that we can use because they're already breaking policy by leaving the scene of the accident. So, it could actually ultimately result in a refusal to test. For the supervisor, document the driver report. And we've included a sample driver report that you can use. Again, it's available in the chat. There's a link to it. We've got both a PDF version and we also have a Word version if you need to customize that to your particular needs. So document the driver report, determine if the FMCSA testing criteria are met, and if they are, initiate testing protocol. Again, if it's not an FMCSA test, and your policy says that you need to test, you would want to initiate that as well at that time. Phase 2, testing coordination. Driver must remain at the scene unless medically required. If testing is required, the supervisor should follow the plan for a local testing scenario or a non-local scenario. Be sure to remain in contact with the driver. This is important. Constant communication between the driver and the supervisor helps ensure that the driver is doing everything that they're supposed to and remains engaged with the situation. Phase 3, document an investigation. So this is going to be probably in day 1 or day 2. So that's where the supervisor completes all the required documentation. This includes the accident register. So we've included a copy of a sample accident register in the chat. Again, we've got a Word version and a PDF version. Download which either one you want or both. But the accident register, that contains generally information, the date of the accident, where the accident occurred, the driver's name, number of injuries, number of fatalities, was a vehicle towed, whether hazardous materials were released. And again, that needs to be retained for 3 years. And additionally, you need to retain copies of all accident reports. Phase 4, follow-up actions. So this will be between day 2 and 7. Driver-related activities should include making sure they're removed from safety-sensitive duties until cleared. Begin the SAP process of a positive test. Complete return to duty testing and initiate the SAP prescribed follow-up testing. Whoops. I get a little click happy there. Employer responsibilities will also include review the findings with your safety compliance team, report to the FMCSA clearinghouse if applicable, and schedule any safety training or retraining or any disciplinary action. Finally, phase 5, long-term compliance. And this could be into week 2 or even farther. And a lot of times this may be just more of a post-mortem about the event. Double check to make sure you have all the documentation that's required. If you use a system like Craig Safety's Compliance Safety Manager, make sure all of your documents are loaded into the system. And, when you're talking with your safety team, review the incident. How was it handled? Identify any problems or successes in your internal management process and adjust accordingly. So being able to weed out hiccups that happened before or learning to apply things that worked really well will only make your process better. So that wraps up most of the presentation here. I'd like to thank everybody for joining us today. I hope you found this webinar informational and helpful. I'm going to pivot for just a quick minute and again invite you to learn more about our services and how we help companies stay DOT compliant. CSM offers a wide range of services, and just some of the highlights: we offer an electronic employment application. We have what we call the hiring path, which helps you manage applicants as you vet them as potential employees. You can manage your employee driver files, which includes alerts and reminders of approaching renewals. We offer drug screening, random consortium services, as well as driver's license monitoring. And again, you can also manage your vehicles in CSM. You can track each vehicle's maintenance schedule, maintain service records, accident logs, roadside inspections, and more. So if you're interested in that, go to our website. We've got a link right up there at the top. Hit the link to contact us, and one of our friendly, experienced reps will reach out to you and see how we can help. Also want to touch on our future webinars. So we've got a couple good ones coming up here in the next couple months. Go to compliancesafetymanager.com and navigate to the webinar page to register. All right, so we're going to take a look. Let me see what questions we have in there. We've got a number of questions in here. I don't think we have time to go through them, so we are going to do the written responses, and we'll distribute all of those to you in the next day or so. And I really like to again thank everybody for joining to our presentation. I hope we found it valuable, and we hope to see you next time. Thanks and have a good afternoon.